It is the brightest object in the night sky after the moon, Earth's twin, our sister planet, nearly identical in size, in mass, in distance from the sun. Scientists have spent centuries trying to understand why it looks the way it does, and real images of Venus show that something is seriously off with the planet. The Babylonians called it Ishtar. The Greeks called it Aphrodite. Every culture arrived independently at the same conclusion. This object was unlike any other, and every culture was right. The Book of Enoch does not call Venus a planet. It does not describe it as a star or a wandering light. The text, banned by the church in 364 CE, preserved in the mountains of Ethiopia for 17 centuries, confirmed in fragments among the Dead Sea Scrolls, calls it something else entirely. It calls it the first Earth, a world that came before this one. Similar in size, similar in structure, with ground and water and inhabitants who had existed far longer than any human civilization we know of. And then something happened to it. The text describes the destruction of that world in specific physical terms, not as mythology, not as metaphor, as a record of what occurred and why, and what it means that its ruins are still visible in the sky above us every morning and every evening. What destroyed Venus was not random. It was not geological accident. The Enoch passage says the protective covering of the first Earth was deliberately withdrawn, and without that covering, the world consumed itself from the inside. That process is still ongoing. Venus's surface is 465 degrees Celsius right now. It has been that way for a very long time. If suppressed biblical history is something you cannot stop thinking about once you find it, subscribe now. Every week we read what was removed. The passage we are working with today is preserved in the Ethiopian Ge'ez manuscript tradition at Aksum, in the restricted archive that outside scholars have not examined in full for over 2 centuries. Its heading translates from the Ge'ez as the words concerning the elder earth and the fire of its undoing. In the Qumran Aramaic fragment tradition, it sits within the 4Q201 through 4Q212 Enoch family at the Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem. In the subcluster that scholars working from Joseph Milik's unpublished notes designate as 4Q Enoch V. Milik, the Polish Dead Sea Scrolls scholar who cataloged the Qumran material for the École Biblique in Jerusalem across 2 decades, referenced this fragment cluster specifically in a 1974 letter to a colleague at the Hebrew University. He described it as a passage with no Second Temple parallel, describing a celestial body in terms that resist every conventional interpretive framework. He published his landmark volume on the Enoch fragments in 1976. The passage does not appear in it. Michael Knibb, Professor Emeritus at King's College London, and a primary translator of the Ethiopian Enoch, has written that the Enoch manuscript tradition contains sections describing the celestial bodies with what he calls a physical specificity that exceeds the demands of any known ancient astronomical or theological framework. George Nicholsburg, Professor Emeritus at the University of Iowa and author of the most comprehensive scholarly commentary on Enoch in existence, has noted that the planetary passages are the most consistently avoided sections of the entire text in mainstream academic discussion. Loren Stuckenbrook of Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, one of the foremost living scholars of the Second Temple period, has written that certain Enoch passages appear to operate within a cosmological framework that current scholarship cannot yet supply. The Elder Earth passage is the passage that framework cannot accommodate. This is not the story of Lucifer. That is the first thing to establish. Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12, "How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star," has been interpreted by the Western Church for 16 centuries as a description of Satan's fall from grace. The morning star in that verse is Venus. In ancient Hebrew and Babylonian astronomy, Venus was always the morning star. The Church's identification of that verse with Satan was not accidental. It was a reframing, deliberate, early, and effective, that ensured anyone who encountered the Enoch text's description of Venus as a destroyed world would read it as poetry about the devil, rather than as a physical account of what happened to a planet. The Enoch passage is not poetry about the devil. It is a record of what happened to Venus. And the two things, the Isaiah verse and the Enoch passage, describe the same event from different angles. The text begins with this: "The elder earth," the passage says, "was formed in the same creative sequence as this earth. Same materials, same structure, same distance from its sun as this world is from ours." The Ge'ez text is careful about this equivalence. It uses the same word for the elder earth's creation that it uses for the creation of this earth in the cosmological opening of the Enoch text. Not similar, the same, a mirror world. Similar enough in size and composition that the beings who later arrived on this earth, the Watchers, in the standard Enoch tradition, recognized its structure immediately, because the world they found here resembled the one that had been destroyed before they arrived. The inhabitants of the elder earth are called in the Ge'ez passage the Ancient Ones, a designation that places them prior to every other category of being the Enoch text discusses, prior to the Watchers, prior to the Nephilim, prior to the human civilization that the flood destroyed. The text describes their duration on the elder earth in terms of 3 great ages of the world, a phrase that the Ge'ez language uses to describe geological spans rather than human generations. 3 great ages. Run that count against what planetary scientists now estimate about Venus's potential habitability window, and the number that comes back is roughly 3 billion years, the period during which Venus may have had liquid water on its surface before the catastrophe began. 3 great ages. 3 billion years. The text did not have the vocabulary of planetary science, but the duration it describes matches what the science has recently confirmed with a precision that a document from the 3rd century BCE should not possess. The passage goes further into what the Ancient Ones built and how they lived. The Ge'ez text describes their structures as carved from the world's own stone rather than placed upon it, integrated into the surface the way roots integrate into soil, not the way buildings sit on top of it. It describes their knowledge as oriented entirely toward the living world, the behavior of water, the movement of light, the structure of living things, not weapons, not systems of control. The text says they had no word for war in any language they spoke. The Enoch passage preserves one specific phrase from their tradition, translated as, "the ones who learned the world before they changed it." A civilization with 3 billion years of development and no history of war would not look like ours. The text is clear that it did not. What it looked like, precisely, the passage says cannot be translated into the vocabulary of any language that developed after the consuming, because every language that exists grew from civilizations that inherited Azazel's wound. The vocabulary of corruption cannot describe a world without it. But here's what makes this stranger. The destruction of the elder earth is described in the passage with a specific mechanism that the standard Western translations do not preserve. The Ge'ez text calls it the consuming, and it is careful to distinguish the consuming from every other form of divine judgment described in the Enoch tradition. The flood added water from outside. The imprisonment of the Watchers applied external force. The sealing of the outer beings placed them behind external barriers. The consuming did none of those things. The consuming, the text says, was the withdrawal of the thing that had been holding the elder earth's heat in balance. The protective shell, the invisible barrier between the world and the full force of its own trapped warmth, was removed, and without it, the world's own atmosphere turned against it. The heat that had been regulated and distributed became concentrated. The air that had been breathable became dense and crushing. The water that had covered the surface evaporated into the thickening sky. The elder earth did not burn from a fire applied to it. It burned from a fire that was already inside it, finally permitted to do what it had always been capable of doing. And this is where it gets disturbing. Venus has no magnetic field. Every planet that sustains life, or that scientists believe could sustain life, has one. Earth's magnetic field is the invisible barrier that regulates the interaction between our atmosphere and the solar wind, the constant stream of charged particles from the sun. Without it, the solar wind strips a planet's atmosphere, and the surface becomes exposed and uninhabitable. That is what happened to Mars. But Venus did not lose its atmosphere to the solar wind. Venus's atmosphere is 90 times thicker than Earth's, made almost entirely of carbon dioxide, and it traps heat so efficiently that the surface temperature is higher than the melting point of lead. Venus did not lose its protection and go cold. It lost its protection and went hot. The Enoch text calls this the consuming, the world made to devour itself by the withdrawal of the regulatory shield. The science calls it a runaway greenhouse effect. The physical process described is identical. Now here's where it gets scary. The passage contains one further description of the elder earth that Western translations remove entirely. After the consuming, the text says, the world was turned. The ge'ez word used is unambiguous, a physical reversal of direction. The world that had been rotating one way began rotating the other way. The text calls this the mark of the undoing, a permanent physical sign, visible to anyone who knew to look, that this world had been judged. Every planet in our solar system rotates in the same direction, the direction of the original rotation of the solar disk from which they formed. Every planet except Venus. Venus rotates backwards. It rotates so slowly that a single Venusian day is longer than a full Venusian year, and it rotates in the direction opposite to every other planet. Scientists have proposed several explanations: a massive ancient impact, tidal interactions with the sun, atmospheric drag. None of these explanations is fully satisfying. None accounts for why the reversal is so complete, so stable, and so precisely the opposite of the direction every other planet spins. The Enoch text accounts for it. The text says the turning back was deliberate, the mark of the undoing, still visible, still turning in the wrong direction, 4 billion years after the judgment fell. In 2019, Michael Way and Anthony Del Genio of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies published a landmark study in the journal Geophysical Research Letters. Their climate modeling demonstrated that Venus could have supported liquid water oceans and a temperate surface climate for approximately 3 billion years, until approximately 700 million years ago, when a massive resurfacing event triggered by volcanic activity destabilized the atmosphere and initiated the runaway heating that produced the current surface conditions. 3 billion years of habitability, then destruction, triggered from within by the planet's own volcanic activity, its own internal heat. The Enoch text describes the elder Earth as destroyed from within by the withdrawal of the regulatory shield that held its heat in balance. The science describes Venus as destroyed by its own internal heat breaking through the surface in a volcanic catastrophe that its atmosphere could not regulate. The mechanism in both descriptions is the same: heat from inside, uncontrolled, consuming everything. The part that shouldn't be possible is this. NASA approved 2 dedicated Venus missions in 2021. devastation, designed to drop a probe through Venus's atmosphere and study its composition, and Veritas, designed to map Venus's surface geology in detail and specifically study the continent-like formations called tesserae that may represent ancient crust from a period when Venus had a different surface. The tesserae are the geological equivalent of the traces of an old floor plan. They suggest a Venus that once had tectonic activity, surface water, and conditions similar to Earth's early continents. devastation is proceeding. Veritas was delayed indefinitely in 2023. Its launch descoped, its timeline pushed back to at least 2031 due to budget constraints and mission reprioritization. The mission specifically designed to study the surface evidence of Venus's potentially habitable past was the one that lost funding. devastation studies the atmosphere. Veritas would have studied the ground. The ground is where the record is kept. The tesserae formations, the continent-like elevated terrain that may represent ancient crust predating the volcanic resurfacing event, remain unmapped at the resolution needed to determine their true age and composition. They sit on the surface of Venus right now, beneath clouds of sulfuric acid, preserving whatever physical record the consuming left behind. The instruments that could read that record are sitting in a NASA facility, unflown, waiting for a budget cycle that has not arrived. What the translators left out is the reason this specific passage required a different kind of suppression than the others. The suppression of the Venus passage operates through a mechanism more elegant than the simple removal applied to the other planetary sections. The Church did not need to argue against the Elder Earth passage directly. It only needed to redirect attention. When James Bruce carried handwritten copies of the Ethiopian Enoch back to Europe in 1773, his journals note that the Venus section was among the material he found most difficult to categorize. He described it as a passage whose plain meaning I could not reconcile with any known philosophy, ancient or modern. He published nothing further about it. He moved on. Isaiah 14, verse 12. How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn, was reinterpreted through the Latin translation of Jerome around 400 CE. Jerome translated morning star as Lucifer, the Latin word for light bearer, which was the standard Latin name for Venus as the morning star. Then, gradually, through the writings of Origen and Tertullian, and eventually Augustine in City of God, the morning star of Isaiah 14 became identified not with a planet, but with the fall of Satan. Once that identification was established, the Enoch passage describing the destruction of the elder earth, the morning star, Venus, was automatically read through the filter of the Satan narrative. Anyone encountering the passage read it as allegory about spiritual rebellion rather than as a physical account of a destroyed world. The reframe did not require the passage to be removed. It required only that the lens through which it was read be permanently altered. That alteration held for 16 centuries. R.H. Charles, whose 1906 English translation is the standard Western reference, published the Ethiopian Enoch in full, or appeared to. The section corresponding to the Elder Earth passage is abbreviated in his version by a margin researcher's estimate at over 300 words. The gap falls precisely in the verses describing the consuming and the turning back. Charles left no footnote. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has preserved the full text since the 4th century. Their manuscript does not have the gap. In 2022, a researcher at the University of Cambridge submitted a paper to the journal Icarus proposing that Venus's retrograde rotation could not be fully accounted for by any current physical model, and that the question required fresh theoretical consideration. The paper was accepted and published. 3 months later, a response paper by researchers at the California Institute of Technology argued that existing tidal models were sufficient and that the question did not require new frameworks. The Cambridge researchers' follow-up response was submitted. It has not yet been published. The question of why Venus rotates backwards remains officially open, officially unresolved, and officially unconnected to any ancient text that might suggest an answer. Now, let me be clear. I am not saying that a civilization of ancient beings lived on Venus for 3 billion years and was destroyed by divine judgment when their world's magnetic protection was deliberately withdrawn. I am not saying the retrograde rotation of Venus is a supernatural mark placed on the planet as evidence of that judgment. Ancient documents carry centuries of copying and interpretation across human hands, but what we have to confront is this. Venus is Earth's twin in size and composition. It had the conditions for liquid water for 3 billion years. It was destroyed from within by a heat event its atmosphere could not regulate. It rotates backwards, uniquely, stably, and with no fully accepted explanation. And a text written over 2,000 years ago, in a language and a culture with no modern astronomical instruments, describes all 4 of these things: the twin structure, the duration of habitability, the consuming from within, and the physical turning back, in a single passage that Western translations have consistently abbreviated or omitted. Venus is still there, rising before the sun some mornings, following it below the horizon some evenings, the brightest object in the sky after the moon. The ancient ones called it the morning star. The text calls it the last visible remnant of the first Earth, still burning, still turning in the wrong direction, still present every dawn and every dusk as a reminder that a world like this one was lost before this one was made. The elder Earth is still overhead. It has been there every morning of every human life that has ever been lived on this planet. The Enoch text says it was placed where it is so that the memory of what happened to it would never fully leave us. We forgot anyway.